was working with spy satellites my whole career. They were the tools of government to allow peace. And you can always look at peace as, is that the deterrence model of a strong military capability that causes deterrence to take place, or it's sort of the flower power of the Berkeleys to where there's no need for any of this. And I grew up on sort of one side of that, where I liked the role of the intelligence community for providing sufficient information to avoid ever having to go to war. Yet I'm an environmentalist in an awful lot of what I do, and so I had the opportunity to declassify the first 12 years of imagery from space, which was interesting because we're all big fans of the Landsat program, which began in 1972 and has been giving us, at ever-increasing resolution, a good scientific record of the Earth. And it turns out in August of 1960, we recovered the first capsule of intelligence imagery from space from a program called Corona. And when I was in government service, I had the opportunity to participate in the declassification of that. And we opened up to the scientists and environmentalists and historians 12 additional years of understanding the planet. So we had imagery from 1960 through 1972 that we released from Corona. And that was sort of excited. Now, what was interesting for me is a university professor across the way here at Brown was Sergei Khrushchev, who was the son of the premier that, certainly as I grew up, that was the bad guy in the Soviet Union. And so we ended up going around town doing speeches, and we're having dinner one night, and I said, so Sergei, what's it like to grow up with your father, the premier of the Soviet Union? And he said, well, yeah, I had several examples, but we got down to imaging from space, and he said, I distinctly remember my father coming home from work and having had a conversation with then President Eisenhower to where we cannot allow the West to understand how weak we are. And it was like, well, I'd been thinking about the Soviet Union and Russia and the detente that we had through deterrence. And Khrushchev, remember, here's the guy pounding his shoe at the table at the UN, having strong opinions about here's how two nuclear powers defend themselves. And so there became a large argument for transparency as a way to keep the peace. And so here we have a tool that supports the environment and supports transparency. And we fast forward, and Peter mentioned, we said, well, let's go get a license and do all of this that we have done for the benefit of government and scientists. Let's go do it for the benefit of industries. And so we formed a company called Space Imaging, and we successfully launched the first high-resolution commercial remote sensing satellite to allow this flow of information into the internet. And I recall, the Forbes magazines and everybody sort of saying, well, what about all the privacy issues? And my easy answer, back in the late 90s as we were doing this is, if you worry about privacy, think about every time you walk up to an ATM machine, and it's imaging your retina and all sorts of bio-recognizable stuff about you. And that was actually a very good defense for the longest time. Not that it was a defense from something, it was just people had this fear of something bad happening. And it was amazing the prolific number of questions that you got about hot tubs. I just did not realize the hot tub industry was so big. But the fact that we were imaging from space seemed to be the question de rigueur, the question du jour about what you were going to go do. But the privacy argument was surprisingly low at the time, and the excitement was surprisingly high. Now, here's a technology that I was very comfortable with throughout my career. I remember putting a briefing together for the Pope. And I remember when the whole briefing was done, I said, doesn't the Pope already know this? Because he has such great providence over the world. But we fast forward, the company that was the precursor to Google Earth was Keyhole, and a couple of the engineers at Keyhole had worked for me, and we were having dinner at a restaurant. We had the prototype for Keyhole up on the computer, and by the end of the meal, I think 100% of the people in the restaurant had come over to our table and was watching us as we flew around San Jose on a laptop, to where it was this huge enabling technology. So the sense at that moment of a privacy concern was sort of zero. You know, people just thought this was so cool. So, you know, in my life, when I'm traveling around, if I have nothing to read on an airplane, I'll sit down next to Peter, and Peter's like, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I put the imagery in Google Earth." And the questions don't stop. People are just absolutely fascinated about how you can type into Zillow and see exactly what your neighbor's house is worth. And so it's this ability to live in somewhat of a transparent world and have some understanding. So we come back to this debate, you know, fast forward to today, and I said, well, who should be our guide star, the digital native or the digital immigrant? Because we both come at it very differently. What's interesting is, you know, being a digital immigrant, I think I should get some credit for being around as we invented all this stuff and thinking about how it might turn out. And we have the digital natives who just says, who cares how it works? You know, I don't know what a CRC table is in my, you know, there's a button to do an exponential. You push the button and it pops out. And so we think about the world very differently. So I have been a large proponent of helping people best understand the technology, because when we understand the technology, we can best anticipate what the technology might do, and if we anticipate what the technology might do, we might actually inform the debate, because the policy community left to its own will not understand the technology based on my experience. And given that, I believe the first rule of policy should be no public policy before its time, because the policy tends to want to be restraining and constraining. So what are we going to do as individuals in a society where the technology enablers are coming at us at the pace at which they are, and we seemingly can't keep up with it? So I was pondering this at a much younger age, and I get seated at a lunch with Edward Teller, who's this Nobel laureate, the father of the nuclear bomb, the co-founder of Lawrence Livermore Lab. And we're sitting there, he's going to be the lunchtime speaker, and he turns to me and he says, "I haven't written my speech yet. What do you think I should talk about today?" I go, this is sort of cool. He's sort of acting like me. We started talking about the impact of technology on society, and he said that the thing he noticed the most over a very exciting time for technology, he said, you know, we used to invent stuff, and he said, I have no idea what this is useful for, but it's so cool, maybe look at the doors it could open for us. And he said by the time he got to you know, a later age, he sort of said, society all of a sudden said, stop, wait, let's better understand the technology before we even begin to adopt it. He said, I fear for a society that doesn't embrace this technology moving along so quickly. So when I recalled this story yesterday, as I was putting my notes together, the magic of the internet gave me a quote from him that I thought was applicable. When you get to the end of the light, you know, and it's time to step into the darkness of the unknown, faith is knowing that one of the two things shall happen. Either you will be given something solid to stand on, or you'll be taught how to fly. And so this technology is sort of surrounding us, and it's probably now sort of time to fly. So, as Geoffrey Moore taught us in Crossing the Chasm, we have the technology enthusiasts and the visionaries, followed by the early majority, the pragmatists. There's those of us that want technology, like I really want a Tesla, and that technology comes at a price that has not allowed me to buy a Tesla yet. But what's happening with this technology, with the global IT infrastructure, it's much less about money, and we watch disruptions like Netflix disrupting Blockbuster, essentially by aligning the necessary ingredients within a new business model, and the world changed very quickly. So if I look at Crossing the Chasm, And this technology effect, maybe it's a little bit what I'll call the Tom Sawyer effect. You know, you recall Tom gets a bunch of boys to do the thing that he doesn't want to do, so he can spend the afternoon goofing off. He gets the boys to pay him for the privilege, and I can take something bad and get paid for the privilege to have somebody else do it. You know, this is really good, particularly somebody like me who's incredibly lazy. And if you're lazy and you covet the latest gadgets, as in the one who dies with the most toys wins, you have an interesting thing happening. One of the greatest laws of the human condition is to make us all covet a thing. And I covet a thing by either making it something difficult to attain, the Tesla, or making something difficult disruptively easy, a Droid or an iPhone. And what you say to non-technical people who own, let's go back a few years with an iPhone, is you said, the first time I handed you an iPhone, did you have any desire to have a manual with it? No. Well, did you want it? Yes. And so it was funny yesterday. I was thinking about this thought and used the internet again yesterday. There's an interesting video on the web where they hand an iPad to a 20-month-old, and the 20-month-old opens the computer, and she immediately is doing this experiment and speaking in French to her mother about her experience being a first-time user at 20 months of an iPad, and you can sort of see the adoption rate of the technology taking place. So it's technology, digital technology, information technology as the great disruptor where it aligns speed, capability, and functionality. So it compresses Tom Sawyer with Crossing the Chasm. I want it, I can have it now. So what's the rub? Well, the rub is actually very easy. We hate big government. We despise big government. We left England for big government. A bunch of guys arrived not far from here on a rock called Plymouth. And so we say this is good technology as long as the government's not involved. So we look back to our digital natives as guide stars. They take their existence in their digital sphere as their core. It's their personal space, and it's unmediated, and it's free. And although digital immigrants accuse them all the time of having a poorly developed sense of risks inherent with this technology, it seems to me in my readings that these digital natives are convinced that they are particularly cyber savvy. I think they just have a different gauge setting. So if you accuse one of them of reckless apathy when they post stuff on, they say, well, we do shout out when our privacy is breached, but it's when they shout out, it's against some of the new norms. And so I have a young friend who has friended me on his Facebook page, but not his parents. And I'm very careful, realizing that I'll be unfriended at some point. But to get cheaper tuition, he moved to the state where he's going to school and bought a townhouse and immediately applied for a driver's license. And as soon as he got the driver's license, he took a picture of it and posted it to his Facebook page and says, resident of my new state. And I got this and I says, I think he's missing one of life's experience about privacy, because there is some personally identifiable information that is can be monetized that he has not fully gone through. So I sent him a private email that says, listen to me very carefully. Just think for a second what you have just enabled. And didn't tell him what to do, but it disappeared as best he could off of his Facebook page. So that was a little bit with age and lack of experience perhaps coming together. So my suggestion for this morning is managing change by technology Darwinism will drive and control this evolution. It's an evolution, not a revolution. It will allow us to adopt technology to help define the survival of the fittest. So the survival of the fittest will be the challenge for us to understand digital's permanence, searchability, replicability, transformability, and the impact this has when exposed and capitalized on by originally unintended audiences. So that's really the issue here. It's probably at the first instance of time not sort of bad, but it's when it's aggregated, searchable, recoverable for some other purpose than originally intended that it gets bad. So the lasting effects of all of this is, I'll suggest, what we want to have done as people think about which part of their digital presence is particularly important. Peter sort of pointed out tweets from neighbors. You know, they don't seem to mind their house prices very much. They don't seem to mind a bunch of stuff. People that are tweeting have this one set of norms. But what I really like is when you take location technology and you can monetize it in a different way. My favorite fish attack of the last couple months is sexual predator in your neighborhood, to where they're now using location technology to just say, can you resist clicking on this link so you can know whether or not your neighbor is a sexual predator, and all they're actually doing is phishing you. But it is, again, this convergence of a different way to monetize it. Again, how we think about it is a condition of our wetware. We've been given very good wetware. One of the big advantages of the wetware is we tend to forget bad things and remember good things, and we don't remember what happened 2 years ago. But this wetware is slowly understanding about the permanence and searchability of the digital record for people to stroll and troll for information which we otherwise would have not given them access to, and they use it in ways that we wouldn't have thought about. So as we as a culture have learned about not to shout fire in a movie theater, we are now finding ways to accept as a good thing searchable metadata around Boylston Street and Copley Square, because information that was an invasion of privacy can all of a sudden become very useful when I can do a bounding box and a circle and process the data. So maybe one of our measures is for when it is in the public good. But when it's in the public good and I can play with this time dimension, the person's digital dossier can betray and create harms like shame, embarrassment, degradation of reputation, purposely harmful postings. And as a trustee at a university, we have this conversation all the time. And it's interesting, it says, should we protect the students from themselves and what they digitally post? At the end of the conversation, where my head ends up is no, it is part of the growing up process. We guide and inform and teach. But the posters in the lobby allow me to infer between 2 or 3 different students the amount of time at the track, the amount of time eating and drinking, and the amount of time in classes, and might be a discriminator for a hiring decision based on data that they published while here at Harvard. And so that data with all of this persistence causes us potentially to think about it differently. As we grow up thinking about this, the Electronic Frontier Foundation issued their 3rd annual report earlier this week to inform the public on how well their privacy is protected and encourage companies to do better. Because remember, I said it's not good for the government to do it because we have a set of rules that clearly define what that is, but we love it when Netflix, Amazon, and the credit cards make decisions based on our digital fingerprints because we find that they are enabling and helpful to our existence. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation had 6 criteria that says when the government comes looking for the data, require a warrant, tell the users that the government wants the data, publish reports that the agencies that typically make requests, publish the guidelines the companies have for responding, going to court when it's an unreasonable request, and lobbying Congress to establish privacy rights by joining the Digital Due Process Coalition. So here is society waking up that says you can do what you want with your own data. We should restrict the government to have appropriate use within due process. And so they listed that Twitter and Sonic had a perfect 6 on their score. Dropbox, Google, LinkedIn, Spider Oak had 5 out of 6. And the bottom was Apple, AT&T, Yahoo with 1 star, with at the very bottom Verizon and what's ever left of MySpace. And so here is a voice, an actor in this sphere, sort of saying, you know, here's how you think about this on this very big division that we have had pretty much right since 1776. And we'll run that as a parallel universe as to what we allow company to do, which will be a lot about opting in and opting out. So we need to build a foundation for all of this that is sound. We don't clearly have all the answers. It is really exciting. It really enables a lot. Having traffic at the street level is really cool as we all opt in to having our iPhones tracked. It is clear, a couple of us did a seminar here a few years ago where we discovered that we can understand epidemics through the internet much quicker than the Center for Disease Control can, given people self-identifying problems. So one of the things that will help us build a strong foundation is education. It's great to see Keith Moss back in the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation, because here's a group that has been doing work for the last, working with people who've done this since the beginning of I'll say geospatial information, and are thoughtful about all of the different uses, and an organization that several of us here are involved with, the Open Geospatial Consortium, which is really working hard to get us to understand what metadata is and to get the standards for metadata so it can be easily exchanged and operated on. Because if I develop some of these standards for precision, accuracy, time, it will allow us to increasingly filter data, and I may be able to just slightly filter data and have it for the greater public good on one side of the equation, and available for where people opt in for it on others, so that I can't maybe differentiate when I'm sitting at a bar, when I'm sitting at a coffee house, doing my studying if my parents are looking at my heat map since they're paying for my college education. So the shout out here is, if we get people to understand the technology and help as we build its foundation, we can help the public policy respond appropriately, so conferences like this can engage the right thought process, so we don't over-constrain what could be the most exciting technology of our time. Thank you.
We're going to not have questions now because we're falling behind. We have some students coming in later. We have our time constraints, so let's go on to the next segment. Okay? All right. And we'll catch up.
Well, first, I want to thank Jeff for his remarks, and I know we're short on time, but